On CBS This Morning, R. Kelly did say he was thinking about seeking therapy in light of all he's been experiencing and the allegations against him. And in the interview, Kelly also addressed his own experiences with being sexually abused, he says, when he was a child. I'm now joined by Dr. Ginny Cristerna, a psychotherapist, live from Chicago, to talk through some of these kind of big reveals and statements that R. Kelly made. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
The first thing I have to talk to you about off the bat is his body language, his behavior, because we've been watching these clips. He stands up, he beats on his chest, he really uses his fists adamantly, and it's very raw, his behavior. But I just wanted to get your professional read on it. I'm sure people will be looking at it and wondering, how real is this? Is he acting big for the cameras? Does this seem genuine? Is this a man backed into a corner? What do you think?
It's definitely something that was pretty genuine. He was backed into a corner, and you could tell that this was probably one of the first few times he had a chance to go out and say in live, live time, what he's been thinking and feeling internally. So that is not unusual, especially for survivors of abuse. But I think what was really interesting is that, of course, there's some element of maybe hyperbole, but I think what we saw most was a genuine expression of what he actually believes to be true. Not saying that it is or is not true, but he does believe that to be true. And he's expressing that fully.
Yeah, I mean, that was one thing over and over again in the interview. He said, they are all lying, they are all lying, I did not do these things. I mean, Gayle King straight up asked him, have you ever had sex, with an underage woman? He said no. He said, none of this is true. He said, I'm not, so he kept very adamantly denying everything. And he did say that was at one point I kind of understood, I guess, where he was coming from. He said, this is the first time I've talked about it. We haven't seen him tweet. There haven't been statements. So he really was speaking out for the first time. He also talked about his own sexual abuse because being sexually abused, because Gayle King said, how do you think that affected you? Because there are many cases where people who have been abused become abusers. There are many cases when people who have been abused do not become abusers. But how do you think it affected you? And here's what he had to say.
It has affected me in a way, though. Yeah. It affected me in this way. Anything that I've been through, that or any struggles I've had in my past, has affected my music. It has,
Has it affected your behavior?
Absolutely not.
It seems a little bit, it's hard for me to comprehend someone saying that kind of experience could absolutely not affect their behavior. What's your take?
Of course it does. Everything that we experience has an impact on how we live our lives, how we think about who we are, how we think about who we are in the world, and how we treat other people and see and understand those relationships that we hold near and dear to us. So, of course, it has an impact. And I think that his desire now or awareness he might need some therapy will help him with that, because there's absolutely no way from the age of latency all the way up to adolescence of having abuse occur that it's not going to affect his decision making. It's not going to affect the way that he sees himself in the world and be able to function. That's completely that's a big part of the denial. He's completely unaware of that if that's what he truly believes.
Right, and I think there's no judgment on an experience affecting you. Of course, something like that happening to someone would affect them and not necessarily turn them into, he kept saying things like, I'm not a monster, I'm not this monster people think, and it's just something like that would affect you. It doesn't mean it would turn you into one thing or another, but our experiences do affect us. So that's interesting. What you're saying that maybe that's part of a denial aspect. And I wanted to talk to you too about what we're going to see tomorrow on CBS This Morning, which will be the sit down with two women who R. Kelly said are both his girlfriends right now. He said some men have 5, 6 girlfriends. I'm dating both of these women. They're in their early 20s, and let's take a listen actually to this interview.
Tell me, Ezra, why you're crying. Tell me.
I'm crying because you guys don't know the truth. You guys are believing some facade that our parents are saying. This is all lies for money. And if you can't see that, you're ignorant and you're stupid.
Just give me your initial reaction to that if you can.
Well, a lot of what I picked up when I saw part of the interview that's going to air Friday, and from R. Kelly's interview this morning, has a lot to do with relativity. Everything is so relative, and I did hear the term brainwashing come up. And, we're going to probably hear a lot more of that from folks who have opinions about this. And in some way, shape, or form, we do have to accept the reality and the fact that these are adult women. But at the same time, there is something that existed before they met R. Kelly that allowed their relationship with him to be okay. And so we don't know what that is. We don't know if that was something that they picked up when they were growing up, if that's something socially or culturally or what have you. But they are okay with this relationship that they have with him. And that's something that a lot of people are uncertain about how to come to terms with. But it's a reality that as adults, they do get an opportunity to make those decisions for themselves while we may not agree with it. So it'll be interesting to see how that unfolds over time as this process continues to move forward.
Yeah, I mean, there have been a lot of accusations, especially in that Lifetime docuseries, of what people have said that R. Kelly did in terms of the way he treated women. Gayle King called him out. She said, you've been accused of emotional, mental, verbal, in some cases physical abuse, and he denied all of that. But he said, I'm not holding women in my basement. I don't have a harem. I don't have a cult. He said, I don't even know what a cult is, which I don't know how. I feel like if you're an adult alive in the world, you know what a cult is. But he said, he denies all those things, and like you said, this concept of brainwashing and influence comes up, and I think we still need to learn so much more about this, but I would imagine certainly, even if you're an adult, at some point you're in some ways a victim, even if it's a victim of emotional, mental abuse, if somebody is brainwashing you and abusing you and hacking at your self-esteem. But can you give me a little bit of insight into that?
Sure. So when we start to talk about being a victim or being a perpetrator, it's a little touchy, right? Because no one wants to see themselves as a victim. It just has this feeling of powerlessness and helplessness. So I think what ends up happening is when people are asked about whether or not they are a victim of something, their automatic response is to deny it. No, I'm not a victim. I have full control over my decisions. I'm making a clear-headed decision, because the dissonance or the cognitive reconciliation that would need to occur is, for some people, really overwhelming and can be experienced as humiliating. So when we start to talk about victims of abuse, whether it's emotional, mental, or otherwise physical, we really want to start being mindful about how we present that information, because if someone is experiencing abuse in that way, we want them to feel okay about sharing their mindset, how they feel about themselves, what's happening to them. Because if they feel like the people who are coming to save them are actually beating them up because of the situation they're in, they're more likely to deny it even more and to hold on to the reality that they're in that moment with whomever they're in a relationship with. So we do want to be mindful of that. The other piece that's really important to be aware of, too, is when we talk about brainwashing, we're really talking about kind of this systemic process, either by force or over time or persuasion, to accept a radically different idea. Radically different. And that's the word that's really important, because if the notion of having 1 or 2 or 5 different girlfriends at the same time was not a radically different notion, if it was okay to do certain things that might have been in the gray area, maybe being in a relationship with someone like an R. Kelly is not radically different. And this is where I think you're going to see a lot of debate back and forth on the parents, on the ladies, on R. Kelly. But again, when it comes down to the legal issue, and I'm not an attorney, I'm a therapist that specializes in trauma and survivors, what we really do want to be mindful of is making sure that whatever comes up for the quote-unquote victims of the abuse comes up in a way where they can at least begin to see what is happening to them, what they're allowed to say no to, in a way that's safer than maybe just going after them and accusing them and attacking them.
Dr. Jenny Cristerna in Chicago, thank you so much. Follow her on social media, everybody, and you can check out her website, highachiever.net. Thank you for your insight. Really appreciate it this morning.
Thank you.
ET Live will be right back talking about The Bachelor Women Tell All Live with the breakout star of it, Demi Burnett.